If you've been looking at knives long enough, you've probably run into these guys. Bark River. Everyone has something to say about Bark River. A lot of people love them. I think I'm in that camp. And a lot of people have some not so nice things to say about them, and those things usually ring very loudly. We'll get into why closer to the end of the video, but straight up I'll give it to you. Bark River knives perform way above the norm for consumer knives. Seriously, these guys make knives that, you know, make Essie look like they're a class below. And hey, you could say that's fair, because Bark River knives, this thing, can cost twice, thrice, even 4 times as much as an Essie. And more on this later too. The point is that you have to pretty much go to a custom knife maker to find anything that's going to rival a Bark River knife in terms of performance and handle options and variety of material. Seriously, they work with most materials you can think of, and simply put, Bark River knives are as close to custom knives as you can get. And especially compared to those knife makers in the USA, it looks like a hell of a deal too, because Bark Rivers cost a lot less than custom knives made with the exact same steel. And that brings me to the materials that Bark River uses. As of September 2022, Bark River Knives makes knives in high alloy American steel sold by Crucible in New York. They start with A2, a premium ingot tool steel, which is their most affordable, even more so than CPM 154, which is in and of itself a pretty affordable stainless powdered steel. And it's worth researching the difference between ingot steels and powdered steels. That's a whole other video to get into for me. But if we go on, they then have CPM S45VN. S45VN is likely to be phased out by this, Magna Cut, eventually. This is the Bushcraft Scout by Bark River, and this is just an unworldly steel. It is overall better as a premium stainless steel, and it's been taken over slowly. As it's becoming more and more available, you're gonna see a lot more Magna Cut knives because it is really special. And then we have CPM 3V, which this mini cap part is, and CPM Crewwear, which this Aurora is. These two are their most tough and edge-holding steels respectively, but they're not stainless. So, which steel should you get? Each one of these steels is absolutely fantastic. A2 is killer. It takes an edge very easily, it is very tough, and it just straight up rocks. And that's their entry-level steel, so they'll be the cheapest Bark Rivers, and that means that regardless of what you pick, you're getting an incredible steel, right? Well, mostly. I think that in the Bark River repertoire, the lower range your steel is, the more you're gonna get out of it, because their A2 and their 3V are heat-treated right where I think they should be, given my very limited, granted, experience and knowledge, of course. All of their heat treating is done at Peters Heat Treat in Pennsylvania. Now let's talk about Magna Cut and Crewwear, Bark River's most premium steels in their repertoire. And like I said, they're fantastic. These Auroras use those steels, and I absolutely love them. But there's a but. There's always a but. The heat treatment that Bark River has done on them is nothing special either. Yes, they're still heat treated hard and outperform your average knife by a lot. But as soon as a Bark River knife meets the same steel with a heat treatment tailored to the size and geometry of the knife in another knife, it's gonna bite the dust. And I'm planning on making a video on everything wrong with Bark River steel, and there's so much wrong with it. I'm kidding. But please subscribe to catch that. It's gonna get a little bit spicy, but let's just say that more performance is left on the table than what I'm content with when it comes to Bark River's premium steels. And I should put these knives away before I poke a hole in me. And just so we're clear, they are not poorly heat treated. Peters Heat Treat is a world-class facility. The concern that I have is with how conservative the heat treat recipes could be. And considering two things, one, how Mike Stewart has spoken about Lauren Thomas, Magna Cut's inventing metallurgist, and that the DBK boys, number two, the DBK boys broke their Magna Cut Bushcraft Scout pretty quickly. I'm concerned about how the steel is brought down to 62 HRC rather than the 62HRC itself that we see in the MagnaCut knives. So I'm gonna make that video, so click the subscribe thing, and now that you're down there, might as well swaffle the like button from behind. There's two categories of handle material. I guess you could say 2.5. You've got your phenolic materials, which are CNC cut and shaped. This is your micarta, your G10. Those are CNC cut and shaped, which makes them a lot cheaper, and they have a better yield because there's less mistakes on them, and they're less costly mistakes. And you also have the natural and artisanal materials like Texas fence post, jigged cow bone, orange camel bone. Mind you, bone handles, stag handles, handles of that type are not contoured. So if you're really buying into the whole handle geometry argument that is made by Bark River, that is a selling point, like this Coke bottle shape, you might want to stick with the phenolic materials, because even though the woods are shaped, they're shaped by hand, and they're each going to be a little bit different. This one's a bit chunkier and thicker than the G10 handle. So if you want to experience the handle as it was designed, get the phenolic materials. Because with these, everything is fully done by hand, which is actually a lot closer to custom knives, and that's why these materials go for a lot more money than the phenolic ones. Not just because the material itself is more expensive, but because the work that is required to put them on the knife is, well, it's a lot more expensive work too. And it's just like their blade grinds. It's how they're made. They're made by hand. And I've got to give it to Bark River in that aspect. Bark River has basically Henry fortified the custom knife. They do some mass production things, and they split up the work among their knife makers. So they water jet cut all their knife blanks. They CNC machine the micartas and G10, as I've mentioned. And they really don't like being called semi-custom. That's the word that a lot of people use. They'll correct you and call themselves semi-production. But if you're pre-ordering, it really is a semi-custom experience. Overall, the pre-order experience is almost custom. Really, you just don't have a say in the steel choice and the grind, but everything else you do. Which brings me to the grinds. They're my favorite. Bark River's grinds are my favorite. They start out grinding the blade flat. So they take the blade blank, grind it flat, but they leave about half of the stock thickness at the edge still, so they don't grind it to sharp. Here's a knife I made. It follows the same philosophy or school of design grinding that you see in Bark River's Convex knives. And trust me, as someone who's done it, and admittedly only as a hobbyist, I don't sell my knives, it takes a lot of time, a lot of care, and a lot of attention to grind convex knives like Bark River does. It's really easy to get impatient and mess up, but when you do it right, the results are so good that it makes up for everything that the heat treatment perhaps lacks. And I do mean everything. Seriously, these knives cut almost like zero grinds, which, for those of you who don't know, a zero grind is like a Scandi, where you have the shoulder where the grind starts all the way down to the edge. There is zero micro bevel. It just goes down to the apex. But despite being so thin, these convex edges almost have the same strength as knives with micro bevels. Those are the secondary grind that you usually see below the main one in knives. That's done to make those edges stronger at the expense of cutting performance. And what a convex grind does is essentially the same thing as a micro bevel in terms of supporting the edge and making it strong, except that instead of having this chunky shoulder and an obtuse grind, what you do is you spread out that shoulder throughout the entire grind, and you're getting rid of that harsh shoulder that micro bevels have, reducing drag, and that's why these knives cut almost like zero grinds, and they don't compromise edge stability and edge strength as much as zero grinds do. And even at 4 millimeters thick, these knives cut like thin knives. They're nearly unrivaled in performance by anything cranked out at a factory, and it's because those knives are pushed out with some darn micro bevels. Now, that comes at a cost, because Bark River's way of making knives is a lot more expensive. It slows down production immediately. You can't have machines do it. But I do think it's the best way to grind. So Because it's something so delicate, Bark River pays extra attention and has their quality control game nailed. Right? Right? Wrong. Bark River has, unfortunately, much looser standards of quality control. They do have standards, but they're looser than someone like Essie. Remember how I mentioned Essie earlier? Let me grab an Essie. Every Essie knife is pretty much perfect. I've ground the edge here so that it's a little bit more convex, but every single Essie knife is pretty much perfect. That's their standard. As far as Bark River goes, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 knives, and I think only 2 of them are perfect. My mini Kepar is ground deeper into the steel stock on one side more than the other. My Camel Bone Aurora has an uneven grind. This side is ground shallower than this side. Look at the shoulder. And it's also not straight. It's only mostly straight, but still not perfectly straight. My Texas fence post Aurora Scandi is, for some reason, shorter than my other Auroras. Explain that. And my Aurora Scandi Magnica is actually pretty much perfect, and my Bushcraft Scout is also pretty much perfect, which is probably a coincidence that both of these are made with phenolic material handles. But to make up for the imperfect quality control, Bark River does have a very generous warranty. It's basically no questions asked except that, did you hand the knife to a badger before breaking it? If you did hand it to a badger, then you're not getting warranted, and they're serious about that. So if you don't like what you got, then I'd count on being able to get it replaced. Unless you live in a country where people think that having a postal system is not a good idea, like the Dominican Republic, which is where I live. If you can't mail stuff, then you're who needs a functional postal service, right? That's such a stupid waste of money. It's a bad idea. Last thing you need to know before buying a Bark River knife is who Mark Stewart of Bark River Knives is. I'm not teasing anymore. I mean Mike Stewart of Bark River Knives. Sometimes I get people's names wrong, okay? I understand if other people do that too. Mike is a gentleman. He's very polite, he's very generous, and he's incredibly happy to share his knowledge with anyone who calls, writes, visits, etc. However, he's a little bit stubborn, and he's very proud. He doesn't take criticism in a 21st century way, and I think it hurts him when people criticize his work or his decisions, and perhaps that's why some people perceive him to be stuck in his ways. But look, Mike's been through quite a bit as a knife maker. He was instrumental for marbles when they mattered, and when they made good knives, and before they started making them in China. And he was making incredible knives at Blackjack Knives, but struggling to run a business. And in a way, it's because he's the exact opposite of a big business guy. He's in touch very personally with his staff, and that's very good. But it took him many years and a lot of persistence to figure out how to run a business in a sustainable way. But what you can't argue, what you can't dispute is that from his early career as a knife maker, no one has questioned his pedigree as a knife maker. What a knife maker he is, man. You can insist that he's set in his ways, that he's not that great of a businessman, or whatever else you want to throw shade on him for, but you can't question that he is an outstanding knife maker. His team believes in him. People love the work he does. I'm in that camp. I greatly admire Mike Stewart. When I have a workshop to make knives, there's a big portrait of him going on the wall. The man's a legend. But okay, finally, with all that said, you still want to buy a Bark River knife. It's great. It's awesome. Welcome to the club. You can check out stores and your favorite knife shops and see if there's Bark River knives in stock. It's unlikely, but it's a pretty straightforward experience. You see something, you buy it, you get it. But that's not the right way of getting a Bark River knife. You have to go to Facebook and join the Bark River production schedule group. Mike Stewart posts the production schedule, and he modifies it throughout the year to show you what knives are planned, which have been delivered, and which are upcoming. Look at that list. Find a knife you like. Check if it's a store exclusive, it'll say it. Those are usually knives shipped free in Tennessee or DLT trading in Wisconsin. And then you find a knife you like, and you head to one of those websites, to the Bark River pre-order section, and you find that knife and place a pre-order with the handle material you want, with the colored liners you want, with the pins or Corby bolt color you want. Like, there's so much you can say you want. You can even ask for thick handles and they'll accommodate you in some cases. It's amazing what you can do with this. Is pretty much a custom knife, except for the steel, obviously the model, and the grind. Like, but apart from that, you're getting a custom knife. So it is fair to call Bark River semi-custom. And that's it. You just tell them what you want and how you want it. And sometimes you have to leave a down payment, and that's it. They'll tell you when it's ready. They'll email you and you buy it normally. That's it. It's pretty great. But there's another scenario. If the knife you like has the big pre-order close sign, hope is not lost. You can try writing them real quick and hopefully they'll reserve a knife for you. But the other option is for you to just wait until the stock lands. They're usually announced in the Facebook group, so you can stay tuned. They'll say Monday at 4 p.m. or something. If you want a specific handle material like ironwood or bog oak, or you want a stag handle, this is where you've really got to pay attention, because you have to be on time and act quickly, because every single listing you see is of a single knife. The picture you see there is the knife you'll get. So if someone else grabs it before you, it's not going to consolidate your order with another knife of the same handle material. You're going to have to pick another one, and you might miss out if it's a knife a lot of people are after. So if you want a knife guaranteed after missing the pre-order window, you just want any knife, pick one of the micartas or one of the G10s. Those are consolidated into a single listing, and you're more likely to get a knife that way. So there's one posting, but there's 20 knives, for example, and that increases your odds by a lot. So once you get that knife, it's only half of the experience, having the knife and using it. Share your stuff on Facebook. That's a very strong community. It's a fun community to engage with, and there's an odd sprinkle of drama in there every once in a while, which one can enjoy. And you know, this is a good moment to let you know that you can build off of that community. A lot of good advice in there. One of the things I should have told you sooner, and one of the things that people will tell you in that community, is if you don't know how to sharpen your knife, you're better off just having a good quality strop and maintaining that edge. By the way, Convex edges love strops. If you want to watch me fix a big chip that was on this knife and restore the convex edge with strops, I made a video for that, so it's worth checking out if it got your attention. That's it for me, folks. I'm out.